So hi everybody, welcome to our hub today, Beyond Email, How Schools Can Transform Communication with HubSpot Sinch. I'm Amy Martos, so I am the kind of Senior Executive Marketing at HubGem. So I'm just here to kind of co-host and kind of introduce the guys. So we've got Ollie Featherstone, our AI lead and CRM consultant at HubGem, and our amazing Luke Jenkins as well, Regional Director from Sinch. And we're partnering up today, which is very exciting. So the two guys will be kind of talking you through the slides, going through all the information. I'm just here to kind of man the chat in the background and get the slides going for you. So yeah, are we okay to just jump right in? So today we've got the kind of changing expectations in school communications, messaging in HubSpot and Sinch, real use cases from education, compliance and best practices, and then of course at the end we'll do a wee Q&A as usual. So there we go. I'll pass you on over to Ollie.
Thanks, Amy. Morning, everyone. I've got the job of sort of setting the scene here a little bit before we get into all the cool stuff that Sinch can do. So the main reason that we're sort of doing this hub today and sort of partnering with Sinch, because we're seeing a bit of a shift in school communications and actually communications generally speaking, I think for all of us, where there's kind of three main points, and it's all around the sort of shift from email to SMS, WhatsApp type communication. So the main one is, look, the families that you're going to be talking to expect instant replies. They expect two-way messaging. They don't want to talk to a chatbot. And at the same time, they also don't want to wait, 2-3 days for a fairly simple response. So long response times naturally are going to create that friction, bit of uncertainty around, am I going to get that response? And of course, potentially a drop-off, certainly at the inquiry stage where you're sort of starting to build that relationship, but even all the way through to sort of your formal admissions process. Email itself as well is also seeing a little bit of a decline, sort of a natural decline, if you like, especially with open rates. And of course, response expectations being faster than ever, email is a little bit more of a long form, sort of slower response generally sort of format. So it's still essential, no question. HubSpot still supports a range of sort of email marketing strategies, but it's, for some at least, no longer the primary channel, especially for urgent communications. Now, WhatsApp and SMS, I think for all of us, dominate our daily communications, and actually over 95% of UK adults are using some sort of messaging app daily, whether that's WhatsApp or the one that comes on your phone. But WhatsApp is the most sort of widely adopted channel, and it's the channel that kind of brings people together and allows you to communicate with a whole range of different audiences as well. So why does this actually matter for you and for schools? Well, it's going to have an impact, isn't it? Of course. So ultimately, if you are losing inquiries or taking a long time to actually respond to those inquiries because you're having to do a lot of sort of manual long form email drafting, or your inbox is just so stacked and you've not got the time to actually sort of go through it, you're trying to prioritize the high priority sort of responses perhaps as well. Ultimately, if you lose that inquiry, then you lose that enrollment. That first touch point really is very important. And often if that's somebody emailing in or actually maybe receiving a piece of marketing from you and responding to that, then actually, how quick are your response times and how quick can you deal with those potential requests? Of course, email being sort of more long form in its content naturally as well means that a lot of your staff are potentially wasting time on what can be a very manual process. Drafting a personalized email response to a lot of these sort of types of inquiries is not a quick job. And generally, I think email, we expect that to be a little bit more formal in its language and a little bit more fluffy around the edges, whereas an SMS or a WhatsApp is very much to the point, very short, you get the answer that you want. And of course, it's quicker to draft for you guys. And then ultimately, if all of that goes wrong in your journey, then you've got frustration with your prospective parents. And even for your parents that are part of the school, already sort of part of that formal process perhaps as well, where they want those quick, snappy updates or some of those urgent comms when their child is actually at the school as well. So the solution that we've gone ahead and sort of sought out really and sort of tried to find here is actually integrating your HubSpot account for new and existing users with a platform called Sinch. So for my very brief introduction before I hand over to Luke for what is Sinch, ultimately it's a secure global messaging platform. You can go ahead and create your WhatsApps, your SMS, your RCS campaigns through Sinch. It naturally, of course, connects up with HubSpot and HubSpot workflows. It's sort of a totally ready as sort of part of that integration piece with the HubSpot marketplace and all the different sort of platforms that can connect up to your HubSpot. And ultimately, what you end up with is that all the benefits of the SMS and the WhatsApp, but you get, of course, that personalized message going out without any kind of complexity in there as well. So that's kind of the scene. That's where we're at. That's why we're here today to introduce this. And I'll hand over to Luke to give you all of the good details.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Elaine. Good to meet you all. Pleased to be here for the hug today. I like the title, the solution being Sinch. So we could certainly be a solution, but ultimately, we want to help higher education organizations reach better outcomes, right? And that's what it's ultimately about, using a mix of channels to go and drive engagement and interest and attendance ultimately for the organization. I won't repeat myself too much. It was a nice intro to Sinch from Ollie. I think outside of the fact that we are a global communications provider, we do have our own APIs, direct products, but as we sort of mentioned and probably gathered, we do integrate with a lot of the leading CRMs and platforms, including HubSpot, where we're a certified app partner. I think we're quite unique with the mix and depth of channels that we offer within the ecosystem. And then I'd say one thing that probably sets us apart is because of the fact we're a truly global company. I think we operate in 60 different countries where we've got a presence, and that helps us understand the local markets very, very well. So we'll actually help customers. All customers will get onboarding and support. So we will help you navigate things like any regional compliance requirements, how to understand what sender IDs are supported, how to provision those, ultimately to get you set up for success. But I suppose ultimately, besides all that good stuff and having a really reliable platform, we help customers select the right channel at the right time. So helping with that go-to-market strategy, what's going to be that right channel mix to go and best engage with your audience, because there's a lot of different channels that are available out there. The ones that we've got up on screen now are sort of leading mobile messaging platforms, but we'll touch on later kind of a full multi-channel or omni-channel approach. And of course, we can use mobile messaging in combination with some of the more traditional channels like telephony and email as well. So we'll dive into some education specific use cases, of course, and walk you through how we see different customers using the platform. But I think it's worthwhile just taking a minute to touch on the evolution of mobile messaging, because everyone's certainly aware of SMS. You may or may not be using that in combination with any email communications and marketing now. And even though it's been around for a long time, SMS in its traditional form still commands a really high open rate. 98% is kind of the industry standard term that gets banded around, and depending on the source that you'll read, that's anywhere between kind of 5 and 8 times what we see on email in terms of the open rate and engagement. So still really important to be using SMS and to try and target people in a more mobile first form. If we look at UK and a lot of European markets, it's a really flexible channel as well, in the sense that we can support two-way messaging. So on the left-hand side, you can see if we wanted two-way and we were using SMS as our channel, we'll send from a number. So we can initiate the contact with our customers, attendees, prospective students, and then also receive a reply back. If we wanted to send more one-way communications for things like notifications and updates, we've got the ability to send from an alphanumeric ID. So we can have our brand, our college name, our campus name, for example. So really good for giving that extra credibility and trust versus perhaps a number that they're not familiar with, but it is just one way and no reply by definition. So we need to edit and think about our use case a little bit, depending on the type of communication we're going to send out using SMS. Then if we fast forward, the images that we see on the right-hand side is a basic RCS, or Rich Communication Services, what that stands for. And this is really kind of the SMS 2.0. We're seeing great results from customers that have been early adopters of RCS. And I'll come on to the different categories in a second, but you can see immediately just from some of the screenshots here, the really nice thing with RCS, it does require an agent profile to be registered that you do in our portal. It takes probably 15-20 minutes. And then from there, that goes off to Google and the operators to be verified. But what it does give you is the ability to have your logo, you can have colors, branding associated with your organization or business. We get the nice trusted shield up the top right to show that the profile has been verified. And much like WhatsApp, we also get read receipts. That's probably one of the big changes, even in its basic form. With SMS, we'll always say, well, you sent out 1,000 messages and X number was successfully delivered to the handset. X number were rejected for some reason, but we never actually know if somebody's gone ahead and opened our SMS message. Whereas with RCS, having those read receipts now gives us the intelligence to understand how our recipients have actually gone and engaged with the content. Have they read the message? And then sat behind our profile, we've got this contact card where we can have our organization's phone number, email address, website. So again, much more credible as a channel, and it allows customers to know that it is a verified sender, and then there's a different call to action that they can take off the back of those messages being received. If we skip to the next one, we'll see the different categories of RCS. What you just saw was in its basic form. The nice thing is, if you're not familiar with RCS and you might be interested, obviously there's a lot of quite tangible benefits that we see versus SMS, but we also price it the same for the UK and a lot of other markets as a standard SMS. So in its basic form, really good. And the way that it works is we'll automatically upscale any SMS messages where they can be delivered as an RCS message. So as long as somebody's running the latest software on the handset and it's supported, you can automatically have the messages delivered as an RCS. And then if not, it will automatically fall back and be delivered as an SMS. If we want to think about incorporating richer media into our messages, and the nice thing is this still sits in the native messaging app within your phone, so there's no additional app download or anything required. But RCS in its single and conversational form allows us to do things like include attachments, images. We can have moving carousels if we want to give a different choice of selections or options within a message. We can have predefined button responses and call to actions. So we move from a fairly basic looking message to something that's quite rich and engaging with the different forms of media that it supports. This slide gives quite an idea. If you can stick to this one just for a second, please, Amy. This just kind of hammers home. We've talked about the verification and the branding side of things as well. It also allows organizations to be a little bit more creative with the type of content that they can include. So if we are thinking about promoting at physical events, we can do things like QR codes. And then I think particularly the two bottom ones that we see there with the suggested replies and the suggested actions, we can sort of follow up with anyone perhaps that's maybe inquired around a course. If they're interested to find out more information, we can very quickly ask for a yes, no reply, or would they like to book a call with perhaps a student advisor. If we're thinking about perhaps open days, if we would send out more of a single or rich RCS message, we can do things like include, could be a welcome video. We can have a virtual tour of a campus. We could include directions to that particular site so they know exactly where to visit on the day. So again, creating much more, I suppose, of an engaging experience when we send these messages. There's a lot more that you can actually do and include within your messaging. I think if you were to summarize what RCS does, it's turning it from being a more standard form of communication and then turning that into experience for customers. One, because that verified profile, they can actually trust that message. They know the message is coming from who they say it is. Because of the different content that we can include, it is about that experience, not just in terms of the aesthetic, but how they can actually come and engage with the content. And then from an efficiency standpoint, by using things like our button responses, we can get answers and confirmation of interest much more quickly. And rather than for somebody having to leave that interface or the conversation, they can go and find out the information that they need to and continue that all within the one thread. And if they are chatting to perhaps a student advisor or somebody, there's the ability to actually include attachments, images, videos, and reply directly back to the customer, so we can reach outcomes for them much faster. That's kind of the more traditional messaging channels that live within your native messaging app. Ollie gave a nice intro earlier, and we know that WhatsApp is super popular, particularly for the UK and similarly in Europe as well, right? If we do have more of an international base in Spain, Germany, it's still, I think, the predominant messaging app. So it's not to say that one's better than the other, and we will do a bit of a comparison in a moment, but certainly one to think about including as part of an omni-channel strategy. If we look at the penetration rate, I think you said 95% of people were using some form of messaging app earlier, Ollie. I think from the stats that we had, I think about 76% is around the kind of adoption mark for the UK in terms of WhatsApp users. So you're getting pretty close to 40 million people are actually WhatsApp users in some way, shape or form. And much like RCS, it does give us the ability to pull in richer media, right? So we can do things like attachments, videos, voice notes, to create a much more engaging experience. And particularly if you are targeting, not always the case, of course, but if you do have a younger demographic, very, very popular in terms of using WhatsApp as their messaging channel of choice. So again, not necessarily leaning towards one or the other, but understanding what are some of the limitations, what are the benefits of these different channels, and using those in combination to go and drive the best engagement. So I quite like this to give a visual in terms of a comparison if we look at the channels side by side. And it's not an exact science, of course, because certain use cases you could use a blend of all of these different channels. I see it much like a toolbox, right? And it's choosing the right tool, the right channel for certain use cases and the outcome that we want to drive. With SMS, works really well for, as I mentioned earlier, for things like notifications and updates. Perhaps now that we could start to incorporate channels like RCS and WhatsApp, perhaps we don't need to use SMS as much for conversational messaging, but where we just want to get a message into the hands of somebody and understand that it's very likely to be read. I think 90% of messages are read within the first 5 minutes. And so in terms of getting that cut through, SMS is still a really great channel. So some of the examples that I put up here, emergency alerts, that could cover things like adverse weather warnings. If there was to be fire issues, we've seen it used in the States. Even slightly sadder use cases like shooter on campus, for example. Anytime where we need to send out a broadcast to all our kind of tutors and students en masse, works really, really well for that. We've got a couple of other ones here, things like cancellations, reminders, tuition payments will all be really popular, and again, necessarily where we don't need a reply back from the students. Reasons that you might use SMS, still really ubiquitous as a channel, high reach and open rates, as we mentioned earlier, versus some of the other richer messaging channels, is going to be very appealing from a cost perspective. Would be the same as I mentioned for basic RCS. It's only if you want to include the richer media that there'd be a slight jump in price point. But if we look to SMS or basic RCS, really cost effective. And in terms of the ability to implement SMS into your HubSpot setup, super quick. You could get you connected in about a minute. And by the time that you've chosen which sender ID you want to use, really from the point of signing up, you could be getting sending within half an hour or less even. So very, very quick and low barrier to entry. If we compare that to RCS, this is where I would start to see use cases being a little bit more conversational in nature, or where we, again, going back to that notion of creating more of an experience for our recipients. So anything related to Open Day, we know that Open Days and events that higher education organizations are going to run, we know that they're super important in terms of grabbing mind share and getting prospective students excited around what you can offer, why might they join you versus some of the other options that they may have. So anything that we can do in terms of promoting those Open Days, we want them to look at our content. The more that we can do in terms of including something that does engage them in the form of video or images, they're much more likely to engage with it and hopefully turn up on those Open Days. We want to make sure that even though if they have registered, any type of scenario where you want to drive attendance to an event, that could be online, that could be in person. Reminders, we'd always advocate for 24 hours before any event, sending a reminder. And then if it's a very large scale event, you probably want to have a drip feed. You maybe have 2 or 3 reminders in the build up to that event, just so it doesn't kind of get forgotten and it's staying front of mind for the recipients. I mentioned some of the virtual campus tours earlier, and even if they have registered for an open day or an event, you could even use it to include calendar bookings or to book a time with, maybe somebody that's running the course. So it could be a head of department or faculty, anything like that. There's a number of different ways that you could start to incorporate RCS. We mentioned earlier, sits in your native messaging app, so there's no additional download required. It gives us that flexibility to choose between, maybe sometimes we could use a basic RCS if we think that we just want a branded message to go out. And then sometimes we could use single if we wanted to have some of those richer elements. We mentioned the fact that it gives us read receipts, and we can also use those read receipts as engagement triggers for HubSpot as well. So This would work. We can also do this for short trackable links if it was a standard SMS, but with RCS, once somebody does actually go and read your message, we can use that to go and do a number of things within HubSpot. So that could be to notify a contact owner, to add to a new list for retargeting, for example. We can send them an automated message reply. I think you were mentioning earlier, Ollie, around kind of efficiency and making sure that we don't leave people unanswered if they do have a query. So even things like using that engagement as a trigger to send them an automated message so that they know that the message has been received and it's going to be passed to the right team for follow-up, obviously instills a lot of extra confidence. And versus WhatsApp, it probably gives us more flexibility. You can still use similar media types, but with WhatsApp, any messages that you're going to send that are initiated from the business, it does need to be approved by Meta. It's a fairly straightforward process, but it does mean that you have to operate within the guidelines of that template. Whereas RCS, it does give you a bit more flexibility when you actually send out your message. You could do that in a more ad hoc fashion if you wanted to. So then leading on to WhatsApp to round out this slide, it is still a social channel. And so I'd say it does work really well if we need to reach particularly an international audience, because we don't need to think about registering an RCS agent profile or necessarily fitting in with some of the compliance requirements of those different countries. So it's flexible in that sense that we can have our one WhatsApp account connected and send internationally. But I would say that generally speaking, I wouldn't be advocating for it in a kind of a pure bulk messaging or marketing sense, I should say. I think it works really well for things like if it was recruitment, doing that in a more targeted, personalized way, perhaps if somebody's already submitted some form of interest or inquiry to us. And then I think some of the other use cases that it can work really well in, where we perhaps going to have a conversation on almost more of a one-to-one level. So things like student counseling, we could have more an individual conversation. If we wanted to put in a requirement or to report something to facilities, I think it would work really quite nicely. Some of the benefits that you get with WhatsApp, obviously it's end-to-end encrypted, so it's a very secure channel. It's hugely popular. Again, we get the read receipts and we can do very similar things in terms of the engagement triggers, tying that into our workflow, and the setup that is going to cover you for all countries that you need to send to. I know that's it's quite a lot to cover off on one slide, but I think we get a lot of questions around, well, when would I use one channel over the other? So I just wanted to sort of call out some of the key differences between them and hopefully give some ideas as well in terms of some of the use cases that we see being used by some of our education customers. Cool. So as we gathered by now, we do integrate quite nicely into HubSpot. We're a native app, right? So you can connect either through the marketplace or quite often we'll work with customers to get connected. You can do that through the Sinch portal. It takes about a minute to connect. But then the nice thing is being a native integration, as a HubSpot user, we want you to be able to do all of your messaging directly from within inside HubSpot. You'd have access to the Sinch portal as well if you wanted to ever run some additional reports, but really you never need to leave your HubSpot environment. If you can skip on Amy, we've got a couple of examples of how you might use it in a second. But you may have heard the term multi-channel and omni-channel. So just to kind of call out some of the key differences between the two. Multi-channel is definitely something that we'd advocate for, getting customers and users to experiment with a wider range of different channels, perhaps rather than just relying on traditional ones like email. So having multi-channel is really good, and it's going to give you the opportunity to engage with customers over the channel of their preference. But the key difference between that and omni-channel is tying that together and bringing that all together within HubSpot. And so the ideal scenario is that we can have all of these channels being used in tandem. And the key thing is that you've got all of that activity logged inside the CRM, right? So any of the activity, regardless of the channel that you use with us, that's going to live on the contact timeline. So we can see that history, we can see it in HubSpot native reporting, and ultimately by using all of the different tools that exist, either natively provided by HubSpot or with kind of best-in-class app partners like ourselves, we want you to be able to have all of that logged in HubSpot, and then that's giving you that kind of 360 view of the customer. And again, what we can then do with that is do much more personalized and tailored messaging or communications of any form on the back of once we've kind of got a much better picture and well-rounded form of that customer as well. This gives us an overview. So Looking on the bottom left, so as I mentioned, all of the activity is going to sit on the contact timeline. With our app, really flexible. So however you may want to incorporate any sort of mobile messaging within your HubSpot setup, we can do, right? So whether you want to message directly from the contact record, we've got a one-to-one UI that's built. If we want to go and add that into workflows, we can do so. Particularly with education, they tend to be more contact-based workflows, just in the sense that, you know, we've got data on our students or prospective students, so they're quite often going to be contact-based workflows. But if you were using some kind of combination of ticket-based workflows, you could also integrate any of the different mobile messaging channels into there as well. And then here we've got an example workflow. So I think I've got a very basic example in the screenshot here. So in its simplest form, if I wanted to go and send out a communication notification to a large audience, I can have my contacts set in a list, and then I can hit my plus, find this as an integrated app, and then send out a message. So you can have a really basic two-step workflow if I just wanted to send out more of a bulk notification or update. The other side of it is we'll sometimes see quite complex multi-level workflows, and I think I do have an example of that for an open day in a second. But the nice thing is, because it comes under the one integrated app, you can see on the left-hand side, once we come to add us in to your workflows, you'll then just go and choose the different channel cards. So whether it's an SMS, RCS, or WhatsApp, you add us in exactly the same way. And when we come to craft the content of our workflows, we're going to be pulling in any of those native tokens and properties that exist inside HubSpot. So things like first name are obviously very common, so we can give a personalized message. But we'd always encourage customers to leverage as much of that data that lives inside HubSpot as they possibly can. So not just you've registered for an open day perhaps, but if we've got any extra intelligence to say, well, they've registered or expressed interest in a particular course, for example, can we pull that into the message so it does feel that it's much more bespoke for that particular individual? So here, a little bit small on screen, but this would just be an example of how you could use perhaps some different channels in combination. So for the purposes here, I've got my segment as a list. So this could be, you know, all individuals that have registered for an upcoming open day in spring 2026. In this particular case, I've chosen to send a WhatsApp because, you know, we think it's going to be a really good target audience for that. And then what we can do using workflow branching logic, we can use the delivery status as a criteria to go and send people down a different path. So for example, if the WhatsApp successfully delivered, then the branch can end there. If perhaps that user doesn't have a WhatsApp enabled number and they can't receive the message, so if we get a message failure, we can then automatically fall back and send a message via SMS. And then if for any reason that fails or rejected, we can then turn to other channels like email as well. So I think using either engagement or delivery status as a criteria to go and work in some branching logic works really well. And ultimately, you know, we don't want to spam. So using these different criteria helps us to be much more targeted and also gives us the best chance of actually knowing that somebody's going to have read our message in some way, shape or form. A couple of things up on the screen now. If you wanted to connect on LinkedIn, welcome any new connections. Happy to have a chat or answer any questions. And if you did want to have a look at our integration, the QR code on the right-hand side, that will take you to our app listing in the HubSpot marketplace. So a couple of different options if you did want to get in contact or just to do a little bit of discovery for yourself. Otherwise, the guys at HubGem know our integration pretty well, and I'm sure they can help with any questions. So whichever way you'd like to find us, a couple of different options for you there.
Amazing. Thank you, Luke. That is, wow. Yeah, that's definitely opened my eyes a little bit on what's possible as well there. So that's some really good stuff. I just wanted to sort of start to round up some of this with some real use cases that we've sort of already seen with a couple of different methods for sort of to start to adopt SMS and kind of WhatsApp. So the first example is sort of one from a client I've previously helped set up with HubSpot. And that was where we integrated the native WhatsApp solution. So that is the ability to just go into the marketplace. Anyone can do it. You don't even need an implementation partner like ourselves. You can just go in, install the integration and start to use WhatsApp inside of your HubSpot account. And this allows for some basic workflow triggers to send, like you mentioned, the sort of pre-approved meta templates through WhatsApp. And we can trigger this on things like property value changes or deal stages, for example. But like with what Luke showed a couple of slides ago with inside of the workflows where you can start to actually build out the message that you want to send, we don't have that functionality here. It is just kind of choose the template, choose how you want that template to be automated and sent, and there's no sort of personalization or additional context you can add at that point. It does, however, allow for you to respond to WhatsApp messages from within your HubSpot inbox inside of the actual inbox tool. But then again, with that solution, you're not really speeding up your sort of response times that much. Drafting an email versus drafting a sort of WhatsApp message is not a massive saving when you're still having to do that manually. So ultimately, we're sort of limited on filters available for the workflows, and it's also not campaign optimized either. So although we can still sort of do some of the functionality that Luke was mentioning, we don't really get the reporting off the back of that either. And like I mentioned, it still requires a bit of a manual job in responding to sort of incoming messages, saving little time over sort of drafting your emails initially anyway. The second example that we've got is actually a client that has already sort of integrated with Sinch. And this was very much sort of used for that sort of open day tour style sort of communications. So some of the things, like the basic example on screen there is that we can include that sort of comms messaging. We can include links, maps for where it is, buttons to sort of confirm they're still attending on the day and things like that. And they actually ultimately they moved to this for a more reliable and cost-effective service for those open day and sort of even general just SMS comms. So they've been sort of utilizing this now for their open day reminders, their taste of day comms, sort of where to turn up, what to bring with you. Acceptance prompts are on there as well, like I mentioned, so that easy sort of confirm, can't make it, maybe reschedule the day and time type sort of pre-made buttons within the message, and also some of their interview day comms as well. So actually inviting sort of the individual students once they get to that point in the process to actually date and time, who you're seeing, where to turn up to, all that kind of stuff. So what we'll do is move on to a couple of sort of final sort of the main questions really that we see from all of that, even after we've sort of gone through the whole speech around what you can do, why it's so good. There's always sort of these two main questions that we just want to sort of throw out to Luke while we've got him here. So the first one of those is on compliance. So ultimately, we're introducing sort of especially for new HubSpot users, you've got a new system, you're now sort of bolting on additional elements to that. So sort of the first question is going to be sort of how do we make sure, Luke, that our clients remain sort of GDPR compliant and the compliance for sort of their area now that we're introducing another system alongside HubSpot?
Yeah, no, really good question. Obviously, GDPR, data security, those types of questions come up an awful lot, particularly when you're sending data across and communicating with your recipients. So we're a certified app. We're also ISO 27001 certified, and we're a GDPR compliant provider as well. In terms of the data security, we encrypt all data at rest and in transit. So that means whether the data is stored or actually during the process of sending a message, we'll encrypt that data. So you know that it's highly secure. And obviously, like we're vetted with HubSpot when we go and build out our integrations as well. So most kind of security questionnaires or due diligence type scenarios that we have to go through, we normally fare quite well in that regard. So yeah, we are a GDPR compliant provider, and we also have an EU data center as well. So in terms of data sovereignty, we can tick that box. If customers were worried about any data going offshore, it would be saved here.
Perfect. And then the second point to touch on is especially useful for those who are currently sort of email only and have never explored SMS, WhatsApp, or any of the solutions. Do you have sort of any general best practice in terms of sort of fitting in for this medium? So, some examples on screen there are quite short, snappy messages, for example. How does that sort of compare to email in terms of some advice on how you'd sort of just structure a message to go out?
Yeah, really good question. If it's all right, can we just skip back to the previous slide? Because I saw a couple of points on there that might be worthwhile just calling out. In terms of consent and capturing that opt-in, opt-out status. So that's the other thing in terms of compliance that a lot of customers will ask us around. If somebody does opt out, how would you do that? And then how do we know that ultimately, if they have unsubscribed, they're not going to get caught up and receive any messages in future. So we do a few things. We allow an unsubscribe either via a link or a keyword response across most of those different channels. So we support unsubscribes in either form. If somebody does come to opt out, a few things happen. We block on the Sinch side at a gateway level, and they're automatically added to an unsubscribe list. Also in parallel to that, the HubSpot property that lives on the contact record would be automatically updated to reflect that they've opted out. So from a visibility standpoint, you can see at a contact level that they have opted out. That bit's not actually going to stop the message going out, but because of the fact that they're blocked at a gateway level, if somebody's accidentally sent a one-to-one message, or if they happen to be part of a list or caught up in other workflows, if somebody had unsubscribed but they were still part of that list, we would then reject that message. So the message is blocked from going to that recipient before it leaves the gateway and it's submitted to the carriers or via WhatsApp as well. So from a compliance standpoint, you're never going to run the risk of somebody receiving a message when they've explicitly asked not to be contacted again. If you ever had a scenario where we wanted to allow them to opt out of marketing messages perhaps, but let's say that they were actually a student, and so we also wanted to have transactional messages that they could receive, we can also set up what we call sub accounts on the Sinch side. So you could have one account for kind of more general or marketing communications, and then you could have one set up for transactional. And so there is the ability to still control that they could get certain messages but not get caught up for any marketing or promotional content. And then going back to your initial question around tone of voice. So, and again, it's not that one's better than the other, obviously, versus mobile messaging versus email. Email, you can put an awful lot of really good, rich content in there. And as you said earlier, it's long form, right? So I think the key difference, SMS stands for a short messaging service. And so the most obvious answer is that messages should be quite short and succinct. And if you think of people viewing it on a phone, you don't particularly want to have to be scrolling to read through all of the content. It's a smaller screen, right? So we do want it to be fairly succinct to the point. And yeah, that goes whether it's for notification-based messages that you're sending, or even if it could be promotional, or it could be where we want somebody to actually take an action. Just being really clear with the call to action, right? So we can do that, give a headline or a one-liner, include a short trackable link, or include a button response, make it really easy for the recipient to digest the information. And then if we do need them to take an action, make that bit really clear as well. In terms of some of the content that you might include, if we're looking at SMS, we'd always recommend sticking to plain text. The main reason for that is SMS, you have a 160 character limit from a billing perspective. If you want that just to be billed as one credit, we can stitch messages together, and it is possible to send longer messages via SMS if you want to, but that message could use 2 or 3 credits if it was really long, for example, or if you were including things like special characters or emojis. I'd say that SMS probably isn't the best channel for that because it will cost you a lot more. And then I'd be much more inclined to lean on channels like the single RCS or WhatsApp. If you wanted to be a little bit more playful or informal with the tones and use of things like emojis and images, I think some of those richer, more modern mobile messaging channels are going to lend itself much better to that.
Amazing. Well, I'll throw it back over to Amy to sort of finish off the hub, Amy.
Yes, so why would SMS be used over WhatsApp? I think we touched on that, but if you would like to kind of briefly touch on that again, that would be great.
Yeah, I think there's probably a few key ones that may have been just touched upon on one of the earlier slides. So I think certainly not everyone is going to be on WhatsApp. It's probably the most obvious one, right? I think it's great. And if recipients do want to engage with you over WhatsApp, then it would make sense to try and have that continuity and continue messaging somebody over a channel of their choice. But with not everyone being a WhatsApp user, I think that's the huge advantage of SMS because it is truly universal and ubiquitous. So perhaps based on the importance or urgency of a message, if we needed somebody to see it, so if it was important, that could be around maybe there's a final deadline approaching, or there was something that was really critical around emissions, I'd probably lean towards SMS or RCS, where it's going to land in the native messaging app, where we know that it is going to land. versus WhatsApp. Unless we know for definite that they are an engaged WhatsApp user, perhaps they're not going to see that message quite as readily. So that would be one of the main reasons that I'd look at it. It can vary a little bit country by country. Generally speaking, SMS will be more cost effective in the UK versus WhatsApp. If you just look at the cost sort of per credit or message that WhatsApp would charge versus an SMS. So that would probably be the second kind of primary reason that I'd say where you might still use that over WhatsApp. And then, you know, if you were to sit on the fence slightly, I'd argue that looking at RCS is another really good alternative because it does give you kind of the aesthetic, it gives you the verification, the trust around the channel. But then if we want to, we can also start to include richer media in it as well. So we kind of get the best of both with RCS, the fact that it's much more likely to be delivered, or if somebody's, even if they're using a really, really old phone, we can still have that automatic fallback to SMS anyway. So that is kind of the hybrid between the two, I'd suggest, and might be a nice option for customers if they're undecided, when should I use SMS or WhatsApp? The other thing that I'd maybe mention on it though is just with the flexibility of HubSpot as a platform, we would kind of advocate for this omni-channel approach. So maybe starting to do a bit more A/B testing, running different campaigns, seeing which campaigns and different channels get you different responses. And then on the back of that, in terms of the engagement or the read receipts, doing some kind of tagging or adding people to lists so that actually if we know that, you know, out of all of my student base or prospective students, if we know that, you know, half are engaging with WhatsApp and reading it, great, maybe we can target them and give them a slightly different tailored message or experience versus somebody that isn't doing that, and then we can have SMS or email as another option for those. And obviously you can build that fairly easily into some of your different workflows.
Amazing, thank you so much. Look, I'm just kind of conscious of time, so we've only got like a wee minute left to kind of wrap up, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to Luke. That has been so informative. I'm sure kind of everybody who's attended will agree with that. I know that I've learned a lot, so big thank you for kind of joining us today. It's been great. In terms of kind of next steps, we have, if you've got any more questions, either for Luke or for us, we do have like a LinkedIn community for our HubGem LinkedIn community, sorry, for our kind of user group. So please pop your questions there. You get somebody back from the HubGem team. We can get back from hear back from Luke as well. Luke, if you want to join that, that'd be great as well. Back and forth, just in case you want to answer any questions. We will also provide you with the slides as well and the recording to this show to this webinar for you all, and as well I will add those QR codes, Luke, as well for you, if that's all right, just so that everybody who's attended or who maybe couldn't attend, I've got access there to Sinch. There we go. Perfect. So just wrapping up from that, thank you so much again, and we hope everybody has enjoyed.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.